Good morning. Hope you're having a nice day. Today we're going to go over and go into one of the poems in my book, The Courage to Speak, Emergence of the Divine Feminine and Soul. And the title of this poem is The Whispering Moon. And the moon is associated with the divine feminine. In Greek mythology, she's called Selene, and she's in a chariot and she pulls the moon across the sky every night with her chariot that is pulled by two silvery horses or a couple of oxen. And the moon goddess was really central. The moon itself was central to ancient culture because they measured the year in lunar cycles, and the cycles of the moon determined their schedule, like what was happening when festivals were, and what they were doing in terms of their relationship to the land itself. So it was a central element to the culture, where it's since been replaced with the sun. So what we see is, again, this is just another way that we can see this shift away from the feminine in a way that's really subtle, and that you don't really realize how some of these simpler ways that these things have been changed that we might not even be aware of. The poem begins, the first lines are, "Deep within the darkness of night, the moon was heard whispering softly of flight." And so when we look at the phrase darkness of night, what we're looking at is this means that there's something happening in the dream, in the unconscious, and we're in the realm of the right brain. So it's like the imaginal, the inner, the subjective. So this message that the darkness of night is referring then to that realm that we consider the feminine, that is the opposite of our daytime consciousness. It's the opposite of this bright shining light on awareness of this world. So it's kind of like an otherworldly kind of message. Dreams then are revealing to us what unconscious blocks they are, and what we have, conditioned beliefs, any kind of repressed emotions are going to be dealt with through the dreams. They're going to be telling us like actions to take, gifts, talents, and purposes. So there's a consciousness in dreams that's guiding us, that knows the past, the present, the future, and is helping us. So this really ties into the poem, I think, really in a nice way, because if you pay attention to your dreams, you've probably noticed before these kind of calls, these kind of messages that come through the dream. So it's really obvious to see it in that way, and to see that how there's this parallel between those things. So again, we're not talking about like the daytime consciousness, but the nighttime consciousness, and that's right where the dreams typically are coming to us from. So the moon was heard, and so again, as I said before, like Selene, the moon represents then the feminine. So we're hearing this coming from the feminine herself, and the message to us. And what I love about this is it implies this relationship, this direct relationship, this idea that, we're not just a random event, but that there's something that's interested in us, something bigger, something that has a more divine nature, that's really interested in who we are, and interested in us personally. And here we're talking the goddess and the feminine, and she's feminine because the moon is considered feminine because it cycles like women. It has the full moon, the new moon, the waxing and the waning, and it aligns with menstrual cycles, the tides, and the tides in water would be symbolizing, like with the tides, that water symbolizing emotions and the unconscious often. So again, you can see how it's all layered, but it all really reinforces the same themes. So in this first phrase, she was heard whispering. And again, that suggests in kind of this otherworldly realm where it's not this overt kind of shouting or commanding or demanding or this kind of um, directive, but it's this very subtle, and even you could even take this kind of parallel to in the biblical sense of the still small voice, right? It's not this kind of in your face kind of a thing, but it's very subtle. So when it's that subtle, it means there's kind of, you have to kind of be paying attention. That if we're not paying attention, then we can kind of miss these messages and these signals that come from the divine. It can refer to intuition. It can refer to images, dreams, as I said, and also feminine ways of knowing. So bodily knowing. Um, People talk about the gut. It can be the heart. It can be other ways of feeling things in your body as well. She speaks to us in subtle ways, and her language is typically symbolic language or symbolism. So it can be images. It doesn't always have to come through as a literal, like, I'm telling you to do this. It often is couched, which is why when I talk about these poems, we're going into that world. We're going into the world of where things aren't necessarily stated always in such a clear way, that they have to kind of be seen for the symbolism and what the symbols are telling to us, because again, we're in the realm of the right brain and not the left brain. In this, again, this first phrase where she's talking about flight, she's whispering softly of flight. And flight, again, is a symbol, represents freedom, ability to fly and kind of leave where you are, which isn't always necessarily literal, but it would be something like leaving behind consciousness, leaving behind, as we've talked many times with the fairy tales, the heroine often leaves the home that she's been raised in, which we've talked about in terms of that kind of family consciousness. So leaving behind the family consciousness, leaving behind the old ways of thinking, maybe childhood, maybe taking responsibility for life as a creator, as opposed to someone who life is happening to us, realizing we have the power within to begin to create the life we're living and not just responding to the life that we're experiencing. Flight often shows up symbolically as a bird, which is something that we saw in Angelina. Remember when she was in the unconscious, that's where she found the bird. Again, here we're in the realm of the feminine, and that's where the freedom was discovered, was in the unconscious for Angelina. If you remember, the first time she had a taste of it was with the butterfly, but then in order to integrate it, she had to go into the unconscious, and that was where she discovered the sparrow. The next phrase of the poem, the next stanza, is into the ears of her daughters and sons, guiding them gently, wake up and move on. The divine feminine then is not concerned with freeing her daughters only. She's interested in freeing her children. And that means there's not this idea of the divine feminine then only relating. I know many people know this. It's not only related to the feminine, but daughters, but it also can relate to sons as well. And of course now that's like a continuum, and there's no longer these kind of clear definitions of what's what, which one's the daughter and which one's the son. So this really is emphasizing that whole range of children, whatever category that they fall into. She's not pushing, she's not shoving, she's not commanding. And as I've mentioned before, what you find with the dealing with dreams and these other realms is just this incredible patience and this incredible persistence. So it's not this kind of hit you over the head kind of get going. It's often just these prompts, just these subtle prompts that can be easy and gentle and doesn't have to be kind of struggling and straining and trying so hard. And waking up, she's guiding us to wake up. And that means become conscious of what's happening, becoming aware of the world that we're living in. And that's often how we become aware of how we've bought into the culture's ideas and the culture's expectations of what has value and what's going to give us fulfillment. Which oftentimes what happens is we check those boxes and then discover that, you know what, in fact, that we checked the boxes and that wasn't it. In those moments when we begin to, those are the awakening moments where we wake up to, oh, what did we buy into that maybe wasn't really accurate? And so what does that mean now? I know I've talked to people before about how, you know, you see people who hit that moment, who reach that moment, whether it's through physical challenges or other ways, and the culture doesn't necessarily say, you know, this is the way that life is guiding you to go. It's down this path. So what a lot of people tend to do would be, you know, get medications or take other things or turn towards addictions because that's the only way they've known historically to deal with challenges. And so that can be at those moments they turn up the volume on those coping mechanisms that they have had since they were young, and don't even realize that this other path, that these other options are even open to them as a way to resolve whatever situation they're in that doesn't feel fulfilling, that does feel challenging. The other ways are possible. So these wake up moments are often subtle, but they can be a little bit more challenging, like I said, especially if it's something that really closes a door to the way your life used to be. And people can get into that place and really be challenged to move into a healthier direction because they just don't know how. They don't even know it's an option. So it's becoming aware of the world that you're in and how does it really feel. I think we saw during the pandemic that people found themselves in this place where they began to question. They were in those awakening moments. Wait, is what I'm doing with my life really fulfilling me? Does it really feel good at the end of the day? Do I feel like I don't want to go back to an office and work there, you know, 40 plus hours a week? Really, that didn't feel good to me. So what other options, you know, do I have? And it's often in those moments of stopping. It's in those moments of pause that we are able to really kind of like calm down, turn away from the world, which is really filled with distractions. And then that's when we go inside, which again is what the poem is pointing us to, that inner realm, that realm that we aren't, it's not our daytime kind of awareness. So moving on from what we've been and who we've been and what we believed as another possibility of moving on. That moving on then would look in that wake up would look very unique to each person because we each have our own individual path and a unique path. There's an underlying commonality as we've talked about in the fairy tales, but ultimately each of us is kind of on a unique journey. And so these awakening moments and these realization moments are important. Adding pause to the day and to a week or to the month and really beginning to reflect on the things that happen. I think I mentioned once before that I've noticed when I, at the end of the day, take a moment to pause and look across at how things have gone through the day, then I can often see how there is a theme and there is a way that many of the things that came to me from, say, a dream or an insight or a song that randomly popped into my head or a conversation I had with somebody. And at the end, I can see, oh, look how that's all tied together. And I talk about this too in sessions with people because they'll be like, well, I don't know the answer. And I'll be like, don't worry about it. You'll tell me the answer. It will come. Like you don't even realize that you're giving the answers to the questions that might come up in a session, but they automatically, spontaneously just arrive. And your intuition, without you even recognizing it, will give us the answers. So taking those moments to really reflect, and again, that's a feminine thing. Reflecting is considered looking back, like you see in the story, the Christian story of, or I guess the Old Testament, of Lot's wife, right? Looking back. And that's what that is taking that moment to reflect and see, okay, what did I miss? Like in that that light of consciousness that you're in through the day, as you're progressing through the day. Okay, what do I need to do next? What am I got to get done? Like, you're kind of, that's the daylight consciousness. So that moment of pause and reflection is turning to that feminine nighttime consciousness in order to see, like, was there some subtle message coming through today? And you can gather insights on practically a daily basis from what's happening. And that would be like awakening on a daily basis to those subtle messages that are coming through almost all the time. The next part is, wake up, my children, to what you have been. The time is now. Don't ask about when. We are children of the divine feminine and the moon goddess. We are her children. And what we've been conditioned to believe from the family, the environment, the ancestors, and the culture is stuff that's already like embedded in the way that we're perceiving the world. When we really explore who we are and what we believe, for example, who we are, we have been taught, has been shaped and determined by the culture. And actually, who we are isn't shaped and determined by the culture. All that's there is the story that we've been conditioned to believe as ourselves. Sometimes the way I describe this is, it's like you come in to this world and you're given a set of clothes and you're told, these are who you are. And because you could change your shirt, you could change your pants, you could change your skirt, you could change your clothes. Because you can change those things, just like you can change yourself, you can change your story. You go from being a child, you go to be a teenager, you get a driver's license. Before you couldn't drive, now you can drive. You might get married, you might have kids, you might like move, like all of you might change your religion. Like all these things that often define us can be changed. That means that's not who we are. Who we are is the thing that doesn't change. And so when we look at like, who am I? How have I been living? One of the things is that we can change things about ourselves that we often think that we can't change. So again, that's the way we've been conditioned to believe this is the way it is. We've been conditioned in a lot of ways to give our power away. And when we question these things and really look at them, it takes this awareness to really, again, reflect on what have I been told? Is this true? And really breaking it down about myself and about the world. And what we've been told about ourselves is just what everybody's projected onto us as children. And you can often even find conflicting information. One of the things that I find fascinating is it's often the conflicting information that if you have this one like embedded belief, then those conflict, those things that were the exact opposite, that were probably there along with this primary belief, we just completely dismiss. And so if you, again, through awareness and through awakening to it and really questioning, like, I believe this about myself, this is what I was taught to believe about myself. Is it true? Is the opposite even true? Can I find evidence for even the opposite of this in myself and in my story? And oftentimes we can. So really discerning what serves us and what doesn't serve us, what limits us and what makes us unlimited, can be really helpful going through this. So limitations about our beliefs about ourselves and the world. She's saying the time is now. Don't ask about when. So don't postpone it. Don't like looking to the future as the time to look inside. I've had people tell me this before, like, oh, when I retire, that's when I'm going to look inside. But we have the opportunity to make changes and evolve in as we go, when we're even younger, and make choices that are more aligned with who we inherently are as opposed to what we've been told. So the present is the place of power. The present is the place to change and the place to begin to take action towards determining a future that may be more aligned with who we are and who we would like to be. The life you asked for has now come to be, the one in which you're happy and free. Again, not waiting for future change, but trusting that we can have things that we desire already right here in this moment. And happiness and freedom are actually our true natures. All that's keeping it from us is what the covering is. So when we receive something that we think we want, like say, a new car, a new job or whatever, and we have these moments where the happiness and the feeling of freedom come through, we get a windfall of money. That's when those things are based on external conditions. And that means it's transitory. That typically means that it goes back to something else and it changes back to something else. So these inherent ways of being, this happiness and this freedom, it's not dependent on the external form. And we've been conditioned to believe that it does, that certain conditions have to be met in order for these feelings that already exist and always exist inside of us, that are just merely covered by these belief systems, and that we can't access them until things outside change. That means the future. So when this changes, then I'll be happy. When this changes, then I'll be free. And in fact, that's not true. It's actually inside of us right now, and it's true inside of us right now. The time is now to be happy and free. In some ways, it's about making decisions, about what's really wanted, and that can often be the catalyst for change. Next, we have the breath is released, your feet on the floor. Walk away from the past. You're so much more. Oftentimes, when we're challenged, we hold our breath, and that's to keep us from feeling. And it's also a phrase we use when we're waiting for something to happen, or when we're afraid of the future. Like those are the moments where we're kind of holding the breath. And she's saying, this has happened. The breath is released. So we don't, like that holding the breath means, right, this kind of resistance to the moment even. And so if that's released, then there's kind of this ease and this openness to what is and the way things are. Feet on the floor implies this kind of grounding, right? The root chakra, like you're connected to the earth and to the physical world, and that implies like this, again, this present moment. Your feet are on the floor. Your head's not in the clouds. Your feet are grounded. You're here, leaving the past. What you've been told about who you are, and that time-based story. And we talked about this. I don't know if it was last week, the timelessness. And the story is based in time. So when I talked about like it being like your clothes, the clothes that you're given in childhood, like that is the time-based story. And that story is changing and will continue to change for as long as you're here. But it's not identifying with the story. It's about shifting that identity and that identification away from the story into something deeper, like the essence of who you are, the soul, which is what this shift is about, which is where the happiness and the freedom actually exist, is in the identification with that part of yourself. You're more than you've been conditioned to believe. We all are. And if you follow their dreams, again, what they're doing is they're stripping it away. They're taking things that you don't even believe limit you, and they're letting you know this isn't true. Like this way of believing is not true. They break it down. The one that I mentioned before is when I had the dream about where I was from. I said, this is where I was born, this state, this city. And then someone came up to me through a solar eclipse at my third eye, and that was saying, no, you weren't born here. You were born when the sun and the moon came together. And isn't that interesting, right? The sun and the moon unite. And here we are talking about that moon consciousness, and that's the divine feminine. So when the divine feminine and the divine masculine come together, that's when the soul is born. And then that's when you're born, is when that soul came into being, as opposed to the moment that you're born onto this planet. They're two different things, because the planet you isn't the you that you really are. The deeper you comes from another time and place. No time and place. How about that? No time and no place. In this moment, you can shift that identification, or you can at least become curious and have that like listening for those whispers about awakening to that part of you. Listen, my children, to what I will say. There's one path to freedom and no other way. Close your eyes to the world, look deeply within, then follow the trail to where you begin. There's only one way to freedom, and it's not outside. And so, again, this is a conditioned mindset that we have, that the freedom is outside, that outside conditions have to change, that it comes through fighting an enemy, it comes through having more money, it comes from being in a different situation, having a different job, like whatever the belief is, or having a different people around you. Those things are actually not the true freedom. True freedom, that can't, because what happens is if it's dependent on the outer circumstance, then if the outer circumstance changes, so if it's dependent on money and you have a lot of money and then all the money goes away, then you're not free again. But if it's rooted in something deeper, the truth that's inside of yourself, then that thing cannot change. That thing cannot go away. That thing will never change, and so you will always be free no matter what happens in the world. And that's where we want to be, not like bandied about by external circumstances and having them determine how we feel. Instead, we have the capacity to determine how we feel and to access the truth inside of ourselves and not be manipulated by the world around us. Looking deeply within, it means it's not a cursory glance. It's not like, okay, I can close my eye, there it is. It might take a few minutes, and we might have to persist and go deeper and deeper in order to discover what is the truth. What is the truth? Following the trail, going back and back through the past, right? It's not this literal kind of, but just like, okay, if I go back further, what was true? If I go back even further, what was true? And going through that and saying, like when you were a little kid, were you free? Right? You had this sense of freedom especially when you felt like your needs were met. And you had that kind of internal sense that you hadn't bought into all the limitations and things yet. So going back to where you begin, to where you were, to that moment when you were born, and what were you then? What were you in that moment when you first emerged from the womb? What was the consciousness that was there before you were told your name, your family, you're this, you're that? Like all those things were layered on to what you were in that moment when you're born. And most kids, like, right, there's this kind of spontaneous like joy and happiness, and then a brief foray into some kind of unhappy emotion, but then they're right back again. The next part goes, then trace it even further to before even then, to see what you were before there was when. So now we're going back not just to the moment of birth, but to before then. Again, we're in that timeless realm that I've talked about before, that time out of time. That's really questioning, like, how did I come into be, and what was I before I came here? And again, what will I be then when I leave? So this could really go forward as well as back. So going back before the moment of birth to see what you were before that moment, the timeless place, before you incarnated into this world, which is the world of time and space. Wake up, my little children, to who you really are. The love is inside you, your light like a star. Who you really are then isn't based on the world, and we can leave that story behind, that identification. Remember, Jesus said, I'm in the world, not of the world. And that's what he's talking about. I'm here, but I'm not of this place. Like we aren't. That's why he said, basically, you're like me. This story is of the world. And if you look again in some of the Nag Hammadi scriptures, what they talk about is how he laughed at the whole thing that we think is the biggest drama, that he laughed at the people. Like, look, you think you're doing this to me. You can't touch me. I'm not of this world. And you're doing this to the part of me that last week when we talked about the false Eve, you're basically doing this to the false Jesus. You're not doing this to the true Jesus. The true Jesus is like laughing at you. There's this understanding that there's a difference between those two things. And that's what that phrase actually means. because the same thing is true for us. So we want to shift from the inner and healing the past, this focus on that, into the creator. And so when we look at our childhood and all these things, the limitations, the beliefs that don't serve us, those things, a lot of us, especially in spiritual circles, psychological circles, have worked for years on resolving those things from the past, and that we're shifting now in consciousness as humanity is evolving into these new paradigms. We're shifting out of this kind of healing focus into creator focus, and that means shifting that identity along with it. The love is inside you. We're conditioned and taught again to look outside of ourselves for that love, and the love actually exists inside of us right now. Like, we don't have to wait for it, we don't have to go somewhere. So any kind of activities that bring that forward are activities that are healing. So when you do what you love, that's why that's so important. And if you see in the culture how there's this movement and this impulse, this inner impulse to do what I want to do what I love. I don't want to go to work every day at a job that I don't enjoy. I want to do what I love, and that's what that impulse is towards, is having that healing experience, and that experience that aligns you with the truth of who you are, right? It's what brings it forward. And the last lines here were saying, your light is as brilliant as a star. You are already a being of love and light. Like, this isn't something that you have to, receive or look for in the world, but it's what you already are, and it already exists inside of you. So imagine if you're understanding and accepting and actually living this truth, right? This is who you are. This is who we all are. When you look at the world and you say, this could be something that would really change people. It would really change things if we understood that what we're seeking out in the world is not where it actually is, and that we have access to these things and can have it right now, and it exists inside of us. So we can stop the kind of over-focus, the over-emphasis on the outer world as the solution to everything that we're looking for, and begin to turn inside for it and develop a more conscious relationship with the divine feminine. So now, as before, last time I did this, I'm going to read you the whole poem together. Whispering Moon. Deep within the darkness of night, the moon was heard whispering softly a flight into the ears of her daughters and sons, to awaken them gently and guide them, move on. Wake up, my children, from what you have been. The time is now, don't ask about when. The life you asked for has now come to be, the one in which you are happy and free. The breath is released, your feet on the floor. Walk away from the past, you are so much more. Listen, my children, to what I will say. There's one path to freedom and no other way. Close your eyes to the world and look deeply within. Then follow the trail to where you begin. Then trace it even further to before even then, to see what you were before there was when. Wake up, my little children, to who you really are. The love is inside you, your light like a star. Yeah. So there you go. Transforming consciousness through channeled poetry. The divine feminine speaks. The courage to speak, the divine feminine speaks. So that's the book, The Courage to Speak. Emergence of the divine feminine and soul, your soul. Well, thank you for listening, and thank you for coming. If you are interested in having a session with me or anything, please feel free to DM me, and we can talk for a few minutes on the phone and talk about the possibility. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a good week. See you next week. Take care.